Don't forget, though, that fifth place could be enough. As things stand, you heard the breaking news on Friday night around Manchester City receiving a 2-year ban from European football for breaching financial fair play regulations. As we've heard already, they will fight the charges robustly and they plan to appeal, first of all, to the Court of Arbitration for Sport. There are so many different angles to this story, but let's start with the football side of things. And we've heard Pep being quoted already saying, whatever happens, he plans to stay. But what if you're one of those players in that dressing room and that ban is upheld, Roy, that 2-year ban? There are only 2 players in that Manchester City squad who have won the European Cup, and that's the 2 backup goalkeepers. Would you not be tempted in their position to seek a move elsewhere?
I think it's difficult. I think it's a big blow to him, obviously. I think from the player's point of view, if I was in that dressing room, the gist of it I'm getting is that they'll probably appeal it. And I think 1 year, you get your head around it. The 2 years, a big blow. The only other side to it, I think maybe this year might make them more determined to try and win it.
Would that be your reaction in there?
Yeah, you have to try and look at the positives. If obviously they're appealing it, but if they've done something wrong, you've got to take your medicine. But if they appeal it and it's the 1 year, that's not too bad. 2 years is a big blow. But we're talking about Man City. We have to remind ourselves, Man City have never been in a final. There was no guarantee they were going to win over the next 1 or 2 years. But it's obviously very damaging for the club in terms of their brand, the financial side of it. You're on about attracting the best players. But I still think City, there's still other challenges out there in terms of trying to win the league title. And I think when you've got Pep Guardiola at your club, you're still going to attract very, very good players.
How do you see it, Jamie? Because again, all the information we have, it is a 2-year ban if it's upheld. Some of these players are coming into the best period in their career. This might be the best chance, maybe the only chance they have of challenging for the Champions League.
None of them players should be even thinking about leaving Man City. Because the way I look at it, what Manchester City have been accused of being guilty of at this moment, of being banned for, is basically so they can spend more in the transfer market or spend more on players' wages. Because at this moment they're not bringing enough money in from sponsors or revenue. Those players at Man City get about 300, 350 grand a week. And Man City are actually
Is that their fault?
No, but what I'm saying is they're getting paid those wages that probably City aren't supposed to be paying. That's why they're being banned. And those players, as Roy said, it's not exactly, they've been there a few years, been very successful, and they've been brilliant for Man City. They haven't won a European Cup. Think of other teams who've had sanctions. You think of Juventus, what Buffon did there when they went down a league, stayed there and was loyal to the club. That's what these players should be doing, really. And Roy mentioned about the fact that it'll make them more fired up this season to go for it. I can't believe they're in the competition now. And not because I'm saying this from a Liverpool point of view, I want City out of the competition. What would happen if City win this competition this season? The favourites for it, they're one of the best teams in Europe. It'll make a mockery of the competition. UEFA will be desperate for Man City to get beat by Real Madrid, absolutely desperate. Can you imagine people from UEFA having to give the cup in Istanbul to a Man City player? They're lifting it. The first question Pep Guardiola will get asked after the game, is this a fake win? Is it like Barcelona? They'll be getting asked questions about the merits of the club, should they be in the competition. So they're in a competition now. If they win it, it'll almost be tainted. It'll be the biggest thing City have ever done, or any club can do, is win.
It would have been anyway, wouldn't it?
Pardon?
It would have been anyway.
What would have
Arguably
been?
The biggest thing they'd ever done, winning the Champions League.
It's the biggest thing any team can do, club team. It's the biggest thing you can win. But the things that will be getting through at Pep Guardiola in a press conference 5 minutes later, and those players, will be about should they be in the competition. I think for UEFA, they should have either took Man City out of the competition right now, or they should have left this decision until the end of the season.
But it's subject to appeal, isn't it? Which is why they're still in it.
Yeah, but this appeal is going to go to CAS. If Man City lose that appeal, then they'll go to the Swiss court. It'll just be ongoing and ongoing.
And then potentially the European Commission after that. So we
But
might not have heard the end of this for some time.
No, of course.
Let's bring in Gary Neville, who's commentating for us at Stamford Bridge this evening. And interesting, Gary, to get your perspective on this as a club owner, of course. What do you make of it all?
It was interesting listening to Judge Carragher then, going through the courts.
Judge and jury.
I mean, I, to be fair, have had a long-held view on FFP. People will say it's because I'm the owner of Salford City, and essentially we would still be in the Everstick North if we weren't able to invest more, even though it's obviously not applied at that level. But the idea that Manchester City are not able to invest the money of the ownership, I disagree with. I've always felt FFP is the wrong way to apply the financial rules. My hometown club, Bury, went bust last year, which obviously a club that's very close to my heart. And I think FFP was brought in to stop clubs essentially going bust. However, there are different ways of achieving that. In all other forms of business, there are bank guarantees, there are bonds, there are owners' pledges. You know, ultimately, if owners sign up to contracts or allow contracts to sign under their ownership, then they should have the money in place to be able to fulfil those contracts. I think Manchester City's owners have got that. I think if you look at what Chelsea, Manchester City, Leicester, Blackburn going back 20 odd years under Jack Walker, we would never see the emergence of these clubs, if you like, below what would be the Manchester United, Liverpool's, Arsenal's, who have got all the sort of history, the revenue, the tradition to be able to compete under FFP. What we're saying is that FFP stifles investment into football clubs that can stimulate communities like Blackburn, like other clubs. I obviously am an owner at Salford. You know, we would never be able to do what we're doing if we weren't allowed to invest into our club. And we're saying that essentially we should create a status quo in football, almost like a franchise. And I think the top clubs in Europe, probably like Manchester United, Bayern Munich, Barcelona, Real Madrid, they would take football towards a franchise-type model if we didn't have the emergence of clubs who could invest and owners who could invest in other clubs. There are negatives with that, and there have been some horror stories of where owners essentially have invested into clubs and then they've not followed through with their commitments. That's got to be stopped. But there are other ways of stopping that without applying FFP. So I have a real problem with FFP to start with. I have done, to be fair, for 7 or 8 years. I don't think it's the right way to apply it. I think City will beat UEFA. I think UEFA, I've got no faith in them whatsoever. I think essentially they're a hopeless organisation who will just apply, to be fair, what would be erratic disciplinary sanctions for different things. And I think City will beat them in the courts. I think it'll get stuck in the courts for some time, but I think City will win in the end.
Well, I'm with him in terms of FFP. The financial fair play, what's fair about a club like Manchester City, who, for besides a few years in the 60s and 70s, have always been in Manchester United's shadow? Are they going to accept that for the rest of their lives? How would it ever change? It wouldn't change unless an ownership like that came in.
Yeah, why can't they do it gradually
you can't
in a more sustainable way? I mean, UEFA have talked about... Originally, they talked about, and just hear me out on this, they talked about introducing FFP to restrict some of the worst excesses of the game. Michel Platini talked about financial doping at the time and trying to encourage responsible spending. I can see you shaking your head on that, Gary.
No, but what we're talking about...
Go on, Gary.
To suggest that Manchester City could ever catch Manchester United through sustainable organic growth is just absolutely nonsense. Manchester United are so far in front with revenue, with scale, with fan base, with everything compared to City. The only way City could ever get to a level playing field with Manchester United was through owner investment. Now, do I like it from a point of view that I want Manchester City to succeed? No, because I would rather Manchester United be successful. But the idea of being anti-competitive in football is ridiculous. The idea that the same 2 or 3 clubs are able to win every single year through financial might is anti-competitive. It goes against everything that we believe in this country. So from my point of view, clubs have to be able to invest... owners have to be able to invest into football clubs, but the minute that they come in, the obligations that they sign up to financially should have to be covered by bond, parent company guarantee, bank guarantee. Bury's situation is absolutely the worst case of where fit and proper owners tests. There's 2 different things here. There should be fit and proper owners tests, and then there should be coverage of obligation. They're 2 things that should absolutely happen in every football club. FFP is a nonsense as far as I'm concerned. It's those 2 things I've mentioned before which should be put in place.
Do you agree, Roy, with what Gary's saying?
The only thing that worries me amongst all of this is surely the clubs have all signed up for this. They've obviously agreed it and signed up for it. So, you know, if they sign up for it, you got to play by the rules, whether it's fair or not. They've obviously come together. I'm sure all the bigger clubs come together. I'm sure they're calling the shots, and if they signed up for it, then they've got to go with it.
I agree with Roy and I agree with Gary. I don't have any time for financial fair play. It's not fair. I'm talking about City forever. Should they accept being in Man United's shadow? I've got it in my own city now where Liverpool just won the European Cup. Everton have got an owner in Mashiri. They've got Usmanov in the background who's probably desperate to invest. As an Everton fan or Everton Football Club, if you could accept for the next 100 years, even longer, that you're just sat there and just watching Liverpool win things that always be better than you, it gives you that hope. But what Roy said is right there. Gary's mentioned FFP. and I don't agree with it, but UEFA's a nonsense. Man City knew the rules at the very start, and they've tried to get round them, allegedly. And if they get found guilty as they are by UEFA right now, or it goes to cash, of course they should be punished and be out of the Champions League.